I am Arlo, 32 years old, and last month I bought my first home after a decade of relentless saving. 10 years of instant noodles, no vacations, and counting every penny led to my proudest moment. Then came the certified letter, a court summons, from my own parents. They were literally suing me for buying myself a house. The shock of seeing their names listed as plaintiffs made me physically ill. How could the people who raised me betray me so completely? Before I tell you how my own parents dragged me to court for achieving the American dream, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever dealt with family who could not celebrate your success. Growing up in suburban Portland, my childhood looked normal from the outside. My father, Jack, worked as an investment banker while my mother, Diane, sold real estate. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn in a good school district. My parents drove nice cars, wore designer clothes, and hosted elaborate dinner parties. The neighbors envied our apparent success, but appearances can be deceiving. Behind our pristine front door lurked a house of financial cards, ready to collapse at any moment. My parents were the definition of living beyond their means. They presented themselves as successful professionals while drowning in debt. I first sensed something was off when I was 8. My best friend Thomas invited me to his birthday party at the local pizza arcade. When I asked for $20 for a gift, my dad exploded, ranting about ungrateful children while my mom cried in the kitchen about overdue credit card bills. Yet 2 weeks later, they bought a new leather sectional for the living room because the Hendersons next door had gotten one. When I turned 12, my parents announced we were going to Disney World. Dad had just finished a big deal at work, and this vacation would be our reward. I remember the excitement of packing my suitcase, the thrill of my first plane ride, and the magic of seeing the castle in person. What I did not see were the 3 credit cards my parents maxed out to pay for it. That trip cost them nearly $10,000 they did not have. But they needed the Facebook photos to maintain their image. The pattern continued throughout my teen years. My 16th birthday came and went without the driving lessons my friends were getting. College application season arrived, and my parents sat me down for a serious talk. They explained they simply could not help with tuition. I would need scholarships or loans. Yet a month after this conversation, my dad drove home in a brand new BMW. When I questioned the purchase, he patted my shoulder condescendingly. "The car is an investment in your father's image, Arlo. In my business, perception is reality," he said, tossing the keys onto our granite countertop. "You will understand when you are older." As I later discovered, my father had a gambling problem he disguised as investments, risky stock plays, sports betting accounts with fancy names, and weekend trips to casinos labeled as business conferences. He lost far more than he won, creating a financial hole he kept secret even from my mother. Not that she was innocent in their financial chaos. Mom had shopping bags she would smuggle into the house when Dad was at work. She had a system of hiding purchases throughout the house before gradually introducing them as items she had owned forever. Her closet contained dozens of garments with tags still attached, waiting for the right moment to make their debut. The full picture of their financial disaster came into focus during my sophomore year of college. I was home during spring break, helping Mom organize tax documents when I discovered credit card statements showing over $60,000 of debt spread across 7 cards. The minimum payments alone took nearly 20% of their monthly income. Mom swore me to secrecy, especially from Dad. "They will ruin your father at the bank if anyone finds out," she whispered, eyes wide with panic. "This is just temporary, until the market turns around." That moment changed everything for me. I realized my parents were financial children wearing adult clothing. They had no actual wealth, just debt disguised as success. Their relationship with money was dysfunctional and dangerous. In that moment, I swore I would never follow their path. My financial awakening intensified when I graduated and landed my first marketing job at a local agency. The salary was modest, but it represented independence to me. I planned to rent a small apartment with 2 roommates, start building an emergency fund, and begin repaying my student loans. Dad had other ideas. Over dinner, celebrating my new position, he casually mentioned they expected me to live at home and contribute 70% of my paycheck to household expenses. He had already calculated what he considered fair based on my starting salary. Since we supported you all these years, it is time you support the family, he explained between bites of steak he had purchased with yet another credit card. That night, I applied for 5 more jobs and secretly secured a tiny studio apartment across town. 2 weeks later, I moved out while they were at a neighborhood barbecue. The text messages started before they even returned home. They ranged from guilt trips about abandoning family to threats about cutting me off completely, apparently forgetting I had been financially independent through college already. For 3 weeks, they alternated between angry accusations and tearful pleas. Mom claimed my departure gave her migraines. Dad suggested I was mentally unstable for choosing independence over family. My sister Taylor, 5 years younger and still living at home, became their messenger, calling to report our parents were barely eating because of my selfishness. Standing firm against this emotional onslaught was the hardest thing I had done at that point. But I recognized the manipulation tactics for what they were. I needed to break the cycle, not just for my financial health, but for my mental well-being. I maintained limited contact, joining occasional family dinners but changing the subject whenever money came up. I refused to discuss my salary, rent, or spending habits. Information was ammunition in their world, and I was determined to remain an enigma in matters of finance. Every boundary I established was an invisible brick in the foundation of independence I was building. The decade following my departure from my parents' house was a masterclass in delayed gratification. While my peers bought new cars, took exotic vacations, and dined at trendy restaurants, I embarked on a different path. My goal was simple but ambitious. Save enough for a substantial down payment on a home while staying completely debt-free beyond my student loans. My first apartment was a 300-square-foot studio with a kitchenette so small I could touch both walls simultaneously while standing in the center. The bathroom featured a shower with unpredictable water temperature and mysterious stains the landlord insisted were purely cosmetic. My furniture consisted of a futon from Goodwill, a coffee table rescued from a curb, and plastic storage bins that doubled as a dresser. The place was tiny but represented something priceless: freedom. As an entry-level marketing assistant, my salary barely covered essentials. To accelerate my savings, I crafted a patchwork of side hustles. Every Saturday and Sunday morning, I walked dogs in my neighborhood, rain or shine. Evenings and weekends found me designing simple websites for local businesses. During holiday seasons, I picked up retail shifts at the mall. For 3 years, I delivered food through various apps during evening rush hours. Each additional dollar earned went directly into my savings account. I tracked every expense in detailed spreadsheets, categorizing and analyzing where each penny went. My budget allowed $50 monthly for entertainment, which usually meant a movie with friends or a couple of happy hour drinks. Birthday and Christmas gifts for family were handmade or purchased from clearance sections. Clothes came exclusively from thrift stores or as Christmas gifts from more financially generous relatives. My diet consisted largely of rice, beans, eggs, and whatever produce was on sale that week. Instant noodles became both a staple and a symbol of my commitment. I learned to enhance them with frozen vegetables and a beaten egg for protein. Restaurant meals were rare special occasions rather than routine indulgences. Lunch was always packed from home in reused containers. While friends posted Instagram photos from Cancun and Europe, I spent my limited vacation days visiting nearby state parks or helping my uncle repair his cabin in exchange for a weekend stay. When coworkers described their new leather sectionals or smart home systems, I nodded appreciatively while sitting on my second-hand futon at home. The latest phones, watches, and gadgets appeared in my social circles while I maintained the same basic models until they literally stopped functioning. The social cost of my financial choices became increasingly apparent through my relationship with Natalie. We met through mutual friends and dated for nearly 2 years. She appreciated my drive and determination initially, even finding my frugality charming at first. That charm wore thin as my spending restrictions affected our relationship. Weekend trips, nice dinners, and concerts all represented budget categories I had minimized to prioritize saving. When Natalie received a significant promotion, she wanted to celebrate at an upscale restaurant. I suggested a picnic in the park instead. Her frustration bubbled over during what became our final argument. "I am not asking you to be irresponsible, Arlo. I am asking you to live a little, to enjoy some of your youth while you have it," she said, exasperated. "You are so focused on some future life that you are completely missing the present one, including ours." She was right from her perspective, and I respected her choice to find someone whose financial philosophy aligned better with hers. Still, watching her leave my tiny apartment that night was one of the lonelier moments of those grinding years. I sometimes questioned whether my extreme frugality was worth the sacrifices, but each time I checked my growing savings account, the numbers reinforced my resolve. At 27, I received a promotion to marketing manager. The salary increase was substantial, nearly 40% above my previous position. Friends and coworkers expected my lifestyle to expand accordingly. Instead, I maintained exactly the same spending patterns, banking the entire difference. My parents somehow caught wind of my promotion and suddenly renewed interest in my life, inviting me to dinner with suspicious frequency. During one such dinner, Dad casually mentioned a business venture that needed investors. "Just 15,000 from family members who want to support each other," he explained while refilling his wine glass. "The returns will be tremendous." I declined politely but firmly, explaining I had committed my funds to long-term savings goals. This prompted an uncomfortable lecture about wasting my youth and living like a pauper. Mom joined in, suggesting I needed therapy for my unhealthy relationship with money. The irony of financial advice from two people drowning in consumer debt while maintaining appearances was not lost on me. I excused myself early that evening, more certain than ever about my path. The real test of my resolve came during my cousin Brendan's wedding. Extended family gathered from across the country for the lavish ceremony and reception. My contribution was a modest but thoughtful gift purchased on sale months earlier. Throughout the evening, relatives commented on my basic watch, the same dress shoes I had worn to 3 previous family weddings, and my older model phone. Uncle Warren, 3 martinis into the reception, loudly asked if I was unemployed or just cheap. "You work full-time but live like a college student," he announced to the table. "What are you saving for? The apocalypse?" The table erupted in laughter. My face burned with embarrassment, but I smiled politely and deflected. Inside, I recommitted to my goal, silently counting the growing balance that represented future security and independence. Their mockery stung, but not enough to derail nearly 8 years of disciplined saving. Through market fluctuations, periods of inflation, and occasional employment uncertainty, I maintained my course. Friends bought homes with minimal down payments and maximum mortgages. Colleagues leased luxury cars they could barely afford. Family members accumulated debt for weddings, vacations, and status symbols. I watched, learned, and continued my steady march toward financial freedom. By my 30th birthday, my savings had grown to $60,000. At 31, it crossed $70,000, then $80,000. The milestones I celebrated privately, with no social media announcements or family notifications. My growing wealth became my secret superpower, invisible to those who thought me simply strange or stingy. The freedom of having options was worth every sacrificed convenience and luxury. The day my savings account crossed $80,000 felt momentous, yet anticlimactic. There was no confetti, no congratulatory phone call, just a number on a banking app that represented a decade of discipline and sacrifice. But that number meant I had reached my target for a substantial down payment on a modest home. At 31, I was ready to begin the next phase of my financial journey. My research began months before I contacted a single real estate agent. Evenings after work found me analyzing neighborhood crime statistics, school district ratings, property tax histories, and projected development plans across the metropolitan area. I created spreadsheets comparing average home prices per square foot in different zip codes, tracking market trends, and calculating optimal commute distances to my office. The mortgage pre-approval process revealed the fruits of my decade-long financial discipline. My credit score exceeded 800 thanks to years of on-time payments and minimal debt. Loan officers actually seemed surprised by my sizable down payment and conservative borrowing requests. One even suggested I could afford a much larger loan, which I politely declined. I was determined to keep my monthly housing expenses under 28% of my income, well below the industry standard recommendation. After interviewing 5 potential real estate agents, I connected with Lisa Martin, a straightforward professional who respected my budget constraints and methodical approach. Unlike others who pushed toward the maximum of my pre-approval, Lisa listened carefully to my priorities: structural soundness over cosmetic features, location over square footage, and long-term value over current trends. The reality of house hunting proved far less glamorous than television shows suggested. Over 3 months, Lisa and I toured 27 properties. Each carried its own disappointments. The charming craftsman with original woodwork revealed extensive termite damage during inspection. The ranch style, with a perfect layout, sat directly under airport flight paths. The colonial with the beautiful yard backed up to commercial property, scheduled for development into a 24-hour gas station. Even within my carefully planned budget, the market presented challenges. 2 offers were rejected in favor of all-cash buyers. Another home was pulled from the market when the owners decided not to sell. A particularly promising property received 15 offers within 48 hours of listing, pushing the final price well beyond my comfort level. Discouragement crept in as weeks stretched into months. Lisa remained optimistic, reminding me that patience typically rewards homebuyers. My decade of savings discipline had prepared me well for this test of perseverance. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Lisa called about a new listing that had just appeared in her broker system, not yet visible on public websites. A 3-bedroom craftsman built in 1938, recently renovated with updated electrical and plumbing. The location was slightly outside my preferred neighborhood, but still within reasonable commuting distance. The asking price stretched the upper limit of my budget, but the description checked every box on my priority list. We toured the house that evening. The moment I stepped through the front door, something shifted in my perspective. The hardwood floors showed the patina of decades of care. Light streamed through original leaded glass windows. The kitchen renovation balanced modern functionality with period-appropriate style. The backyard featured established fruit trees and enough space for a vegetable garden. Upstairs, the smaller bedrooms would make perfect home office and guest room spaces. The basement was dry and finished, offering additional living space. As we completed the tour, Lisa noted my unusual quiet. Most properties prompted immediate analysis from me. Lists of pros and cons, calculations of repair costs. This time, I simply absorbed the space, imagining morning coffee on the covered front porch, summer evenings in the backyard, winters by the brick fireplace. If you are interested, we should move quickly, Lisa advised. This will not last long in this market. I nodded, already mentally drafting my offer. The asking price was $340,000. About $15,000 more than I had planned to spend. After reviewing comparable sales in the area, Lisa and I agreed to offer $335,000 with an escalation clause up to $345,000. I also wrote a personal letter to the sellers describing my journey of saving for a decade, my commitment to maintaining the character of their home, and my appreciation for the evident care they had put into the property. The next 48 hours were excruciating. Lisa informed me there were 3 other offers, at least one significantly above asking price. I went through work meetings in a distracted haze, checking my phone constantly. Sleep proved elusive as I ran scenarios in my mind, adjusting budgets and calculating what maximum price I could responsibly manage. The call from Lisa came during my lunch break. I stepped into an empty conference room, heart pounding as I answered. "They accepted your offer, Arlo," she announced, the smile evident in her voice. "Your letter made the difference. The owners are retiring to Arizona and wanted someone who would love the house as they have. They chose you at $342,000, and they are leaving the washer, dryer, and refrigerator." For a moment, I could not speak. 10 years of sacrifice had culminated in this moment. I thanked Lisa, ended the call, and sat alone in the conference room, allowing the reality to sink in. I was going to be a homeowner. The following weeks passed in a blur of inspections, paperwork, and preparations. The home inspection revealed minor issues, nothing structural or significant. The sellers agreed to repair the gutters and service the furnace before closing. My loan application progressed smoothly thanks to my well-documented financial history. Title search, appraisal, and final mortgage approval all proceeded without complications. Throughout this process, I told no one in my family about the pending purchase. Experience had taught me that my parents would find some way to insert themselves, to claim credit or demand involvement. This achievement would be solely mine until it was complete and irrevocable. The closing date arrived on a sunny Thursday afternoon. I signed dozens of documents, initialed countless pages, and handed over a certified check for the down payment and closing costs. When the title company representative handed me the keys, the significance of the moment almost overwhelmed me. These small pieces of metal represented not just access to a building, but the culmination of a decade of disciplined saving and careful planning. That evening, I sat alone on the floor of my empty living room, keys beside me, taking in the space that was now mine. The house echoed with possibility. Tomorrow, I would begin moving my modest belongings from the apartment that had been my home for years. Soon, I would need to share this news with my family. But for tonight, this moment belonged to me alone, a private celebration of a promise kept to myself through years of sacrifice. The Sunday following my closing date, I invited my parents to dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant. After a decade of saying no to expensive outings, I decided this one celebration was warranted. My plan was simple: share my achievement in a public setting where their reactions would hopefully remain contained. We ordered appetizers and made small talk about the weather and my sister's new job. Once our entrees arrived, I took a deep breath and shared my news. I wanted to let you both know that I purchased a house. I closed on Thursday. For 3 seconds, silence hung over the table. Mom recovered first, her smile tightening at the corners. In that way, I recognized from childhood disappointments. Well, isn't that interesting, she said, voice pitched higher than normal. Where exactly is this house? When I named the neighborhood, her eyebrows rose fractionally. Not the best area, but I suppose it's what you could afford. What is it? A townhouse? Condo? It's actually a 3-bedroom craftsman, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Almost 2,000 square feet, with a finished basement and nice yard. Dad set down his fork with deliberate precision. You bought a detached single-family home? In this market? He leaned forward. How much? I hesitated, already sensing the conversation heading in an uncomfortable direction. $342,000. His eyes narrowed. And the down payment? 20%, I answered, deliberately vague about the exact figure. Mom nearly choked on her wine. You put down almost $70,000? Where did you get that kind of money? I saved it, I replied simply. Over the past 10 years, my father laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. Nobody saves $70,000 from an entry-level marketing job. I am not in an entry-level position anymore, Dad. I was promoted years ago, and I lived very frugally and worked side jobs. I have been saving for this specific goal since I graduated college. My mother set down her glass, eyes suddenly damp with tears. I always knew you were hiding money from us. All those times you claimed you couldn't help when we asked for small loans. All those family vacations you skipped claiming you couldn't afford it. Meanwhile, you were hoarding thousands. I wasn't hoarding money, Mom. I was systematically saving toward a specific financial goal, my father snorted. You should have invested in the family business opportunities I told you about. Could have doubled your money by now. I chose the security of homeownership instead, I said evenly, though my appetite had disappeared entirely. A tense silence fell over the table as our server refilled water glasses. I hoped the conversation might shift to safer territory. But my father was not finished. So, this house of yours, he began casually. How many bedrooms did you say? 3. I responded cautiously. Perfect, Mom interjected, suddenly brightening. We have been thinking about downsizing. The upkeep on our place is becoming too much for us. My stomach dropped as I realized where this was heading. The timing of this is actually perfect, Dad continued. We can move in with you temporarily while we sort out our situation, maybe 6 months or so. We can help with utilities, of course. The practiced way they presented this plan suggested they had discussed it before tonight, perhaps as soon as I mentioned buying a house. I set down my fork and looked directly at both of them. That will not work for me, I said firmly. I bought this house for myself. I am not looking for roommates. Roommates? Mom gasped, hand flying to her chest in practiced offense. We are your parents, Arlo. Not random strangers off the street. My father leaned across the table. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us? We are struggling financially. The market has been difficult. Property taxes keep rising. Your mother and I need support right now. I am sorry you are having financial difficulties, but moving into my new home is not the solution, I maintained, keeping my voice low and steady. I can help you look into financial counseling programs if you would like. Do not patronize us, Dad snapped, voice rising enough that diners at nearby tables glanced over. We don't need counseling. We need family support. That's how families work, Arlo. They take care of each other. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. The stress is affecting my health. My blood pressure is through the roof. The doctor says I need to reduce stress immediately. The familiar manipulation tactics washed over me. In years past, these approaches might have worked. The guilt, the health concerns, the family obligation card, but a decade of independence had strengthened my resolve. I understand this is disappointing, but my decision is final. I stated calmly. My house is not available for you to move into. Dad slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. This is about money then? Fine. We raised you. Put food in your mouth. Clothes on your back. We deserve a share of your success. Either sell the house and give us half, or add our names to the deed. Those are your options. If you want to remain part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. Mom sniffled dramatically while Dad glared. Certain his authority would win out, as it had throughout my childhood. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my barely touched meal. I love you both, but I will not be threatened or manipulated. I paid for dinner already. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. As I walked away, I heard my mother's stage whisper carrying across the restaurant. He would let his own parents become homeless. Who raised this heartless person? The barrage began before I even reached my car. Text messages from Mom about ingratitude and broken family bonds. Voicemails from Dad, alternating between rage and attempts at reconciliation that always circled back to moving in with me. My sister called to ask why I was upsetting our parents so badly, clearly having heard only their version of events. For a week, the onslaught continued. Email paragraphs detailing their sacrifices during my childhood. Social media messages suggesting I had legal and moral obligations to support them. Even flying monkeys in the form of extended family members reached out, concerned about the sudden family rift. The final communication came from my father, a text message that simply read, "You will regret choosing a house over your family. Remember who made you who you are." Little did I know just how literal that threat would prove to be. 2 weeks after the disastrous dinner, I arrived home from work to find a certified letter in my mailbox. The return address belonged to a law firm I did not recognize. Assuming it was related to my recent home purchase, perhaps some overlooked paperwork, I opened it while walking up my front steps. The contents stopped me cold. It was a summons to appear in county court. The plaintiffs listed were Jack and Diane Harris, my parents. They were suing me. At first, I thought it must be some elaborate scare tactic. My parents were manipulative, but surely they would not take their own son to court. Then, I read the complaint details. They were claiming they had financially supported my adult life, enabling my savings and house purchase. They alleged verbal agreements existed entitling them to a portion of my assets. The document cited specific amounts they claimed to have loaned me for college tuition, rent assistance, and car repairs, none of which had actually occurred. The final paragraph stated they were seeking 50% ownership of my new property or equivalent monetary compensation plus legal fees. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. I sank onto my porch steps, the paper trembling in my hands. The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined possible. My parents were not just pressuring me. They were willing to commit perjury, to create fictional financial support that had never existed, all to lay claim to my decade of sacrifice and saving. That night, I experienced my first genuine panic attack. Alone in my kitchen, the room began to spin as my breathing became shallow and rapid. My chest tightened as though squeezed by invisible hands. For 15 terrifying minutes, I genuinely believed I might be dying, until gradually the symptoms subsided, leaving me exhausted and shaken on my kitchen floor. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. After 3 cups of coffee and hours researching legal options online, I reached out to my friend Marcus, who had recently gone through a complicated divorce. He immediately recommended his attorney, Sarah Jordan, who specialized in family law. "I feel ridiculous even asking this," I told Marcus over the phone. "What kind of parents sue their own child?" "The kind who see you as a resource, not a person," he replied grimly. "Sarah has seen it all. Trust me. Call her today." Sarah Jordan was able to see me the following afternoon. Her office occupied a converted Victorian house downtown, the interior blending historic charm with modern professionalism. Sarah herself was perhaps 50, with prematurely silver hair and rectangular glasses that gave her an appropriately serious appearance. After reviewing the summons and complaint, she looked up at me with an expression mixing concern and reassurance. "This is what we call a nuisance lawsuit, Mr. Harris. It has very little legal merit, but that does not mean we can ignore it. Frivolous claims require serious defense." The retainer fee she quoted, $3,500, represented a significant portion of my carefully planned new homeowner emergency fund. But the alternative, representing myself against my parents' legal team, seemed far more costly in potential outcomes. "I need to understand everything," I said, writing the retainer check with a slightly unsteady hand. Did they have any claim at all to my house? Could they force a sale? Sarah spent the next hour outlining our strategy. We would need to document my financial independence thoroughly. Student loan statements proving I had financed my own education. Rental payment records showing I had covered my own housing costs. Tax returns demonstrating my income sources. Employment verification for my main job and side gigs. Their lawsuit hinges on 2 key claims, Sarah explained. First, that they provided substantial financial support enabling your savings. Second, that verbal agreements existed regarding your obligation to support them. We need to disprove both claims convincingly. As I gathered documentation over the following days, the emotional toll became increasingly apparent. Coworkers noticed my distraction. Sleep proved elusive, my mind racing through scenarios and rehearsing explanations. The pride I had felt in my new home became tainted by the legal threat hanging over it. A week before the court date, my Aunt Cynthia called. "Your father is my brother, and I love him. But you need to know this is not the first time he has tried something like this," she said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting down at my kitchen table. "Your grandmother left a small inheritance when she died. It was supposed to be split between your father and your Uncle Roger. Your dad claimed there was a verbal agreement that he would receive a larger portion because he had helped her more in her final years. He tried to sue Roger over it. The judge threw it out, but the family was fractured for years. This revelation led to a call with Uncle Roger, who confirmed the story and offered his unwavering support. He has always seen money as something owed to him, Roger explained. When the world does not give him what he thinks he deserves, he tries to take it from those closest to him. The night before court, my boss Frank called me into his office. He had noticed my performance slipping and the dark circles under my eyes. When I reluctantly explained the situation, his reaction surprised me. "Take tomorrow off, obviously," he said. "And however many days you need to resolve this. Family lawsuits are hell, and you have been carrying this alone." He reached into his desk drawer and handed me a business card. "My brother is a financial forensic specialist. He helps attorneys trace money in divorce and family cases. Call him if you need expert testimony. No charge, my professional courtesy. That unexpected support brought the first tears since this ordeal began. The recognition that not all family relationships were transactional, that some people offered help without expecting anything in return, provided a glimmer of hope amid the legal darkness surrounding me. The morning of the court date. I awoke before sunrise after just 3 hours of fitful sleep. I showered, shaved meticulously, and dressed in my best suit, a charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes. Sarah had emphasized the importance of appearances in court, so I wore a conservatively patterned blue tie and polished black Oxfords. In my briefcase, I carried every financial document from the past decade. Tax returns, pay stubs, bank statements, student loan paperwork, rental agreements, and employment contracts. The county courthouse was an imposing limestone structure downtown, its marble steps worn from generations of anxious footsteps. Inside, the high ceilings and hushed tones created an atmosphere of solemn authority. Sarah met me in the lobby, professional and reassuring in a navy suit, carrying a sleek leather portfolio. Remember, speak only when addressed directly by the judge, she advised as we checked the docket postings. Answer questions truthfully, but concisely. No emotional outbursts, regardless of what they claim. We found the assigned courtroom and took seats on the right side of the aisle. 10 minutes later, my parents entered with their attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, who I would later learn was James Sullivan, known locally for aggressive litigation tactics. My mother wore a conservative dress and appeared to have been crying. My father looked stern and righteous in a suit I recognized as new. The surreal nature of the situation struck me forcefully. Here I sat, opposed to the people who had raised me, about to argue before a judge over whether they could claim part of my home. For a moment, I considered simply giving in, offering them money to end this nightmare. Then I remembered the decade of sacrifice, the thousands of instant noodle dinners, the missed vacations and social events, all to achieve financial independence. This house represented more than property. It was the physical manifestation of my commitment to financial responsibility, the very quality my parents had never demonstrated. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Eleanor Winters entered the courtroom. A woman in her 60s with short gray hair and penetrating eyes, she moved efficiently through preliminary matters before addressing our case. Harris versus Harris, she read, glancing up at both parties with a slight frown. Counsel, your opening statements, please. James Sullivan approached the podium with practiced confidence. Your Honor, this is ultimately a case about family obligations and verbal contracts. Jack and Diane Harris sacrificed tremendously to raise their son, providing him not just with basic necessities but with advantages and opportunities that directly enabled his current financial success. They paid for his education, subsidized his housing in early adulthood, provided transportation, and offered ongoing financial support during his career establishment. I struggled to maintain a neutral expression as Sullivan continued spinning a fictional narrative of my parents' generosity. According to him, they had an understanding that these investments in my future came with an obligation to support them in their later years. He characterized my house purchase as a deliberate attempt to hide assets that should rightfully benefit the entire family. When my parents had created such comfortable circumstances for their son, Sullivan concluded dramatically, "It is unconscionable that he would now abandon them in their time of financial need, especially after purchasing a substantial property that their support made possible." Sarah approached the podium next, her manner calm and methodical. Your Honor, this case lacks both factual basis and legal merit. My client, Arlo Harris, has been financially independent since age 22. He financed his education entirely through student loans and scholarships, which records will clearly show. He has paid his own rent, transportation, and living expenses throughout his adult life without parental assistance. The house he recently purchased was the result of a decade of extreme frugality and multiple sources of earned income, all thoroughly documented. She gestured toward our evidence binders. Furthermore, Your Honor, there was never any verbal contract regarding support obligations. The plaintiff's claims represent an attempt to extract financial benefit from their sons, responsible financial planning. Planning that ironically stands in stark contrast to their own financial management. We ask that this case be dismissed and that plaintiffs be required to cover my client's legal costs for this frivolous action. Judge Winters reviewed documents from both attorneys before calling my mother as the first witness. Mom dabbed at her eyes before taking the stand. The perfect picture of maternal suffering. Under Sullivan's questioning, she painted an elaborate fiction of parental sacrifice and support. According to her testimony, my parents had contributed over $40,000 toward my college education, regularly supplemented my rent payments, loaned me money for car repairs and medical expenses, and provided ongoing financial assistance throughout my 20s. We always told Arlo that family supports family, she testified, voice quavering. We made it clear that our financial help came with the understanding that he would help care for us as we aged. That is how families work. The fiction was so complete, so contrary to my actual experience, that I found myself wondering if she genuinely believed her own testimony. Had she constructed an alternate reality where they had been generous, supportive parents rather than the financially irresponsible figures who had refused to even complete FAFSA forms for my financial aid applications? My father testified next, his approach more stern than tearful. He claimed to have had explicit conversations with me about reciprocal financial obligations within the family. According to him, I had verbally agreed on multiple occasions to support my parents once I achieved financial stability. The sudden purchase of a house worth nearly $350,000, without any discussion with his family, represents a clear attempt to circumvent his obligations, Dad stated firmly. He knew we were struggling financially. He knew we needed support, yet he deliberately hid his savings and purchasing plans from us. Throughout their testimony, I maintained the composed expression Sarah had advised, though my physical reactions betrayed my stress. Sweat dampened my shirt collar. My stomach churned with nausea. The sheer audacity of their fabrications left me simultaneously angry and heartbroken. When it was my turn to testify, Sarah led me through a methodical accounting of my actual financial history. I explained my student loans, showing documentation of the principal and accumulated interest I had been repaying for years. I presented rental agreements with only my signature, bank statements, showing consistent monthly payments from my account, employment verification from my marketing firm, and side gig clients established my income sources. Tax returns demonstrated no financial gifts or support from parents. When asked directly about verbal agreements to support my parents, I answered truthfully. There were never any such discussions. My parents refused to complete financial aid forms for college, telling me higher education was my responsibility. Since graduation, they have never provided financial assistance. In fact, they have repeatedly asked me for loans which I declined due to their history of financial irresponsibility. The most powerful testimony came unexpectedly from Malcolm Jenkins, my former landlord for 3 years. Sarah had subpoenaed him to verify my rental payment history, but he offered more than just confirmation of my reliable payments. Mr. Harris was an exemplary tenant who paid on time every month, Malcolm testified. I recall his parents visiting once and expressing surprise that he lived in such a modest apartment given his job. They suggested he should lease one of my more expensive units and said, and I quote, We could help with the difference if you put the lease in our names to improve our credit score. Mr. Harris declined firmly, stating he only spent what he could afford himself. As testimony continued, Judge Winters increasingly directed skeptical questions toward my parents and their attorney. When asked for documentation of the alleged $40,000 contribution to my education, Sullivan was forced to admit they had only verbal evidence. When pressed about bank records showing transfers to my account, my father became visibly agitated. Those records are unavailable due to bank account changes and the passage of time, he claimed, his face reddening. Your Honor, a father should not need receipts to prove he supported his son. The judge's expression remained neutral, but her follow-up questions became more pointed. Mr. Harris, she addressed my father, you claim financial hardship as part of your rationale for seeking support from your son. Can you explain the nature of these hardships? My father shifted uncomfortably. The economy has been difficult. Investment returns have been lower than anticipated. Property taxes have increased. According to your financial disclosure, you recently purchased a new vehicle for $56,000, the judge noted. Would that qualify as a hardship purchase? That vehicle is necessary for my professional image. Dad responded stiffly. My business requires certain appearances be maintained. My mother interjected, apparently trying to redirect the conversation. Your Honor, our concern is primarily about having secure housing. We simply want to move in with Arlo temporarily while we sort out our situation. So this lawsuit is primarily about gaining residence in your son's home? The judge clarified. Well, yes, Mom admitted, or fair compensation if he refuses to help us that way. Judge Winters removed her glasses and looked directly at my parents. Let me understand this correctly. You are suing your son because he purchased a house and refuses to let you live in it? And your claim to his property is based on undocumented financial support you allegedly provided years ago? My father began to respond with increasing agitation, but the judge held up her hand. I have heard sufficient testimony and reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. This court finds no credible evidence of either substantial financial support from plaintiffs to defendant or any enforceable verbal contract regarding future financial obligations. She continued with increasing sternness. The documentation clearly shows that Arlo Harris has been financially independent throughout his adult life. His home purchase represents the fruits of his own labor and financial discipline, not parental support. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the judge added, looking directly at my parents, the court finds this lawsuit to be without merit and potentially filed in bad faith. The defendant is awarded reasonable legal fees to be paid by the plaintiffs. Those fees will be determined at a subsequent hearing if the parties cannot reach agreement. My father stood abruptly. This is outrageous. That is our son. We have rights. Mr. Harris, the judge warned. You are in my courtroom. One more outburst, and you will be held in contempt. This matter is concluded. As the judge exited, my father stormed out of the courtroom, nearly colliding with the bailiff. My mother followed, sobbing dramatically. Sarah gathered our documents, offering quiet congratulations on the favorable ruling. The victory felt hollow, though. I had won legally, but lost any hope of a healthy relationship with my parents. In the marble hallway outside the courtroom, my father was waiting. His face was flushed with anger, tie loosened, and collar unbuttoned. As I approached, he stepped directly into my path. You have destroyed this family, he hissed. After everything we did for you, after all our sacrifices, you are dead to us now. Do you understand? Dead. I looked at the man who had raised me, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the insecurity and desperation behind his bluster. In that moment, I felt an unexpected calm, the certainty that comes from standing firmly in your truth. You cannot take what you never gave, I said quietly. I have always been on my own, Dad. Today just makes it official. I walked past him toward the courthouse exit, each step feeling lighter than the last. The legal battle was over. The emotional reckoning was just beginning. The first night in my house after the court case was strangely anticlimactic. I should have felt triumphant. The judge had ruled entirely in my favor. My parents could make no legal claim to my property. Yet as I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and new furniture, still covered in plastic, victory felt hollow. I had won the case but lost my family. Despite their flaws, despite the manipulation and dishonesty, they were still the people who had raised me. The finality of the rupture hit harder than expected. I poured a glass of whiskey, not to celebrate but to numb the confusing mix of relief, vindication, and grief washing over me. The following weeks brought waves of second-guessing. Had I been too harsh? Too uncompromising? Could I have found some middle path that preserved both my boundaries and the relationship? Late-night thoughts circled through what-ifs and alternate scenarios, none fully satisfactory. Sleep became elusive, productivity at work suffered, and the joy of homeownership dimmed beneath the shadow of familial rejection. My sister Taylor called 2 weeks after the court date. Her loyalty remained with our parents, but curiosity had led her to read the court transcript. The fabrications had shocked her, forcing a reevaluation of family dynamics she had long accepted without question. Our conversation was tense, but represented the first honest communication we had shared in years. While not taking my side exactly, she acknowledged the lawsuit had been inappropriate and promised to stay in touch independently of our parents. Support emerged from unexpected quarters. Marcus and his wife Jennifer brought dinner one evening, filling my kitchen with conversation and normalcy. My boss Frank checked in regularly, offering flexibility when needed. Co-workers who had heard abbreviated versions of the situation expressed solidarity through small gestures. Coffee left on my desk. Lunch invitations. Patient understanding when my focus wandered during meetings. Most surprising was Uncle Roger, my father's brother, who called to express unequivocal support. I always knew Jack had problems with money and truth, but taking his own son to court crosses a line, Roger said during one of our increasingly regular conversations. You did the right thing, standing your ground. Some people only respect boundaries when they are enforced with consequences. 6 weeks after the court case, I hosted a small housewarming gathering, nothing elaborate, just a dozen friends, good food, and conversation that flowed easily through the rooms of my home. Looking around at these people who supported me without demands or conditions, I recognized the foundation of a chosen family forming. These relationships, based on mutual respect rather than obligation, represented a healthier model than what I had grown up with. The healing process accelerated through small projects around the house. Each improvement, from painting the spare bedroom to installing shelves in the garage, represented an act of claiming the space as truly mine. The garden especially became therapeutic. The physical work of turning soil and planting vegetables offering tangible results for my efforts. Weekends found me outside in all weather, creating the yard I had envisioned during my years of apartment living. As spring turned to summer, I received a text message from my mother. It began with familiar patterns of guilt and emotional manipulation. Father's Day is coming, and your absence is breaking your father's heart. You always were a stubborn child. I wonder if you enjoy our suffering. In the past, such messages would have triggered anxiety and defensive responses. Now I simply recognize them as attempts to regain control. After careful consideration, I replied simply. I am open to rebuilding our relationship when you are ready to respect my boundaries and acknowledge the lawsuit was inappropriate. I wish you both well. Her response included no such acknowledgement, only further accusations. I deleted the message without reply, a small act of self-preservation that would have been impossible months earlier. The absence of ongoing contact with my parents created space for reflection on other relationships in my life. I began noticing patterns of giving too much, of accepting disrespect, of prioritizing others' comfort over my own needs. These revelations led me to seek professional help. Therapist Helen Marshall specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. Our weekly sessions helped identify patterns established in childhood that continued influencing my adult relationships. My extreme frugality, while financially beneficial, partly stemmed from anxiety and control issues developed in response to my parents' chaos. My reluctance to share personal achievements came from years of having accomplishments weaponized or claimed by my parents. The most significant realization was that my parents' behavior reflected their own limitations and wounds, not my worth as a son or person. Their lawsuit, while painful, was a desperate attempt to maintain control over someone who had established independence. Understanding this did not excuse their actions, but helped free me from continuing to seek their approval or validation. 4 months after the court case, my parents sent a letter through their attorney. It contained what might generously be called an apology, though it accepted minimal responsibility. We regret the misunderstandings that led to legal action. While we still feel family should support one another, we acknowledge the court found no basis for our claims. Perhaps in time, wounds can heal. The letter concluded with a subtle suggestion that reconciliation might include financial support from me, despite the court's ruling. The old me might have seized this olive branch, however flimsy. The new me recognized it as another attempt at manipulation. My response, also through legal channels, was brief but clear. I appreciate the acknowledgement of the court's decision. I remain open to rebuilding our relationship based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries, which include financial independence on both sides. No further communication followed for several weeks. Then my father called on a Sunday afternoon. The conversation was strained, but notably free of both accusations and requests for money. We spoke for 15 minutes about neutral topics: weather, local news, my sister's new job. It was the most normal interaction we had shared in years. While not a reconciliation, it suggested the possibility of a new, more limited relationship governed by clear boundaries. As the 1-year anniversary of my home purchase approached, I decided to host Thanksgiving for my chosen family. Taylor accepted my invitation, as did Uncle Roger and Aunt Cynthia. Friends from work and my wider social circle filled the remaining seats. For 3 days, I prepared dishes both traditional and experimental, finding unexpected joy in creating a welcoming space for people who genuinely cared about me. The meal itself became a celebration not just of traditional gratitude, but of authentic relationships and personal growth. Conversation flowed easily around my dining room table. Laughter echoed through rooms that had once felt empty. Looking at these faces, I recognized that family could be defined by love and mutual support, rather than merely biological connection. The financial wisdom gained through this experience extended beyond my personal situation. Friends increasingly sought my advice on budgeting, saving, and long-term financial planning. My systematic approach to achieving goals resonated with many who felt overwhelmed by their financial situations. Without positioning myself as an expert, I began informally mentoring several younger colleagues, helping them establish sustainable patterns while avoiding my own extremes of frugality. The deepest lesson emerged gradually. True wealth encompasses more than property or savings. It includes healthy relationships, clear boundaries, and the courage to protect both. My parents had accumulated material possessions while bankrupting themselves emotionally. Their pursuit of appearances had left them with neither financial security nor authentic connections. By contrast, my decade of material sacrifice had ultimately yielded both financial independence and the wisdom to build healthier relationships. My house became not just shelter but sanctuary, a physical manifestation of values I had fought to establish and protect. Each mortgage payment represented another brick in the foundation of independence. Each gathering of friends and chosen family filled the space with the authenticity my childhood home had lacked. On quiet evenings, I often sit on my front porch watching the neighborhood settle into twilight. These moments of contentment confirm that the true measure of success lies not in what we possess, but in what possesses us. Not in appearances maintained for others, but in foundations built to support authentic dreams and genuine connections. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who could not respect your boundaries? What was that experience like for you? I would love to read your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button, subscribing to my channel, and sharing this video with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. And remember that sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones that ultimately bring the most peace.